The crimson light of Ruby Nine's moon cast long shadows across the rugged terrain as Dr. Mara Sinclair adjusted her atmospheric filter and scanned the horizon. The mining outpost that was to be her home for the next 6 months loomed in the distance, a collection of prefabricated structures surrounded by a shimmering energy barrier. This remote planet, valued for its rich deposits of quantum-stable minerals, was as beautiful as it was deadly, a fact Mara had prepared for extensively during her training. "Helios Forward Base. This is Sinclair approaching from the South Quadrant." She spoke into her comm unit, her breath creating small clouds of condensation inside her helmet. "Requesting entry protocol." "Copy that." "Dr. Sinclair," came the crackling response. "Barrier Section C7 will deactivate in 30 seconds. Please proceed directly to decontamination." As a veteran xenobiologist specializing in survival predation, Mara had visited her fair share of hostile environments, but Ruby 9 presented unique challenges. The atmosphere was breathable but laden with particulates that could irritate human lungs after prolonged exposure. The gravity was slightly stronger than Earth's, making each step require just a little more effort. But it was the wildlife that truly made this place fascinating and terrifying. The massive doors of the airlock slid open, and Mara stepped into the sterile white chamber. A fine mist descended from ceiling nozzles, neutralizing any potential contaminants she might have picked up during her short walk from the landing pad. "Welcome to Helios, Dr. Sinclair," said a tall man in a crisp uniform bearing the Quantum Dynamics Corporation logo. "I'm Security Chief Vasquez. We've been expecting you." "Thank you," Mara replied, removing her helmet and shaking out her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, a souvenir from years spent in high radiation environments. "I'm eager to begin my field observations." Vasquez's expression tightened. "With all due respect, we run a tight operation here. The perimeter barrier is state-of-the-art, but it's not designed to accommodate scientists wandering around outside. This isn't a research station." "I understand your concerns," Mara said smoothly, having anticipated this reaction. "But my contract with QDC specifically allows for monitored excursions to document predator-prey dynamics. It's why I'm here." "Your quarters are in Section E, near the eastern perimeter," Vasquez said, clearly deciding to table the discussion for now. "The Chief Science Officer will brief you tomorrow at 0800. After settling into her sparse quarters, Mara unpacked her equipment: high-resolution binoculars, sample collection kits, portable analysis modules, and her prized possession, a custom-built sound projection device capable of mimicking local fauna vocalizations. She had just finished calibrating her atmospheric testing kit when a deep, resonant roar echoed from beyond the barrier. Mara froze, her hands hovering over her equipment. That sound, she had studied recordings, but hearing it in person sent a chill down her spine. It was the distinctive call of a Ravakai, the apex predator of Ruby 9's complex ecosystem. Sleep evaded her that night. The roar had awakened something primal in her researcher's mind, a burning curiosity that wouldn't be satisfied by second-hand data or remote observations. Before dawn broke over the rusty horizon, Mara had made her decision. Bypassing the main security checkpoint was easier than she'd anticipated. The mining company's focus was on keeping things out, not in. With her atmospheric filter secured and a small pack of essential equipment, Mara slipped through a maintenance access port during a scheduled barrier recalibration. The air outside was thick with the scent of Ruby 9's strange vegetation, metallic and sweet simultaneously. Moving with practiced stealth, she followed a natural ridge that provided both cover and a vantage point. The tracking device on her wrist pulsed softly, indicating increased biological activity ahead. Then she heard it again, that same powerful roar, but this time tinged with something else: pain, Anger? The sounds of conflict grew louder as she crested a small hill and looked down into a shallow valley. What she saw made her blood run cold. A massive creature stood with its back against a rock formation, bleeding from multiple wounds. Its hide was a mosaic of armored plates and leathery skin in mottled gray and crimson, perfectly evolved to blend with Ruby Nine's distinctive landscape. 6 powerful limbs, 4 for locomotion, and 2 specialized upper appendages with wickedly curved claws, tensed as it faced its attackers. The Ravakai's elongated head featured multiple eyes, arranged in a pattern that allowed for nearly 270-degree vision, and a jaw that could certainly crush bone with ease. Surrounding it was a pack of Skrell. Scavengers, typically, but known to hunt in groups when opportunity presented itself. Larger than the wolves of Earth, but with similar pack dynamics. They circled the wounded Ravakai, darting in to inflict more damage, before retreating beyond the reach of those deadly claws. Mara's scientific brain immediately began analyzing the scene. The Ravakai was gravely injured, outnumbered, and though it was the superior predator, the pack tactics of the Skrell gave them the advantage. Without intervention, the outcome was statistically clear. Non-interference is the cornerstone of field biology, she whispered to herself, reciting the mantra that had been drilled into her since her undergraduate days. Natural selection at work. But as she watched the magnificent creature fighting against impossible odds, another part of her, the part that had driven her to become a xenobiologist in the first place, rebelled against clinical detachment. This wasn't just data. This was life. Complex and valuable, struggling to continue. The Ravakai roared again. The sound now unmistakably one of pain as a Skrell managed to tear into its flank. Blood, dark and viscous, flowed from the fresh wound. Mara's hand moved to her pack before her mind had fully committed to the decision. Her sound projector could be reconfigured to emit frequencies that would disorient the Skrell without harming them. It wasn't technically interference with natural selection if she was merely evening the odds. Just this once, she muttered, fingers flying over the device's controls. For science, the high-frequency pulse that emanated from the device was barely perceptible to human ears, but the effect on the Skrell was immediate. They faltered, several shaking their heads in confusion. Mara followed this with a thermal flare that mimicked the heat signature of a much larger predator approaching rapidly. The combination proved effective, the Skrell disoriented, and now faced with the prospect of a new threat. Broke formation. After a moment of chaotic milling, the pack retreated, disappearing into the tangled undergrowth with frustrated yips and growls. Silence fell over the valley, broken only by the labored breathing of the Ravakai. It remained in its defensive posture, eyes now fixed directly on Mara's position. Her camouflage gear was designed to fool human eyes, not the specialized vision of Ruby Nine's predators. "Don't mind me," she said softly, though she knew the creature couldn't understand her words. "I'm just going to observe from here." But as she watched, the Ravakai's legs buckled, and it slumped against the rock face. The extent of its injuries became more apparent. 3 deep gashes across its torso were bleeding steadily, and one of its secondary limbs hung at an unnatural angle. Mara bit her lip. She had already broken protocol by interfering with the Skrell attack. Approaching an injured apex predator went beyond professional risk into the realm of suicidal behavior. But if she did nothing, the creature would likely die from blood loss or infection, and her interference would have only prolonged its suffering. With methodical precision, born from years of fieldwork, she laid out her medical supplies. The first aid kit designed for human emergencies contained broad-spectrum antibiotics and synthetic clotting agents that her research suggested would be compatible with Ravakai physiology. Preparing a tranquilizer dart with a mild sedative, she took careful aim. The dart struck true, embedding in the less armored area near the creature's neck. The Ravakai flinched, then growled, its multifaceted eyes scanning for this new threat. Mara remained perfectly still as the sedative began to take effect. Not enough to render the massive predator unconscious, but sufficient to dull its pain and make it less likely to attack. When the Ravakai's posture relaxed slightly, Mara began a slow, careful descent into the valley, maintaining eye contact and moving with deliberate gestures. Everything in her training screamed against approaching an apex predator this way, but her instincts told her this was the right course of action. "I'm going to help you," she said in a low, steady voice. "But you need to not eat me, okay? That's the deal." The Ravakai watched her approach, a low rumble emanating from its throat, not quite a growl, but a warning nonetheless. When Mara was about 10 feet away, it raised its upper limbs slightly, displaying those lethal claws. She stopped, set down her medical kit, and then did something she had never done in all her years of fieldwork. She sat down, making herself smaller and less threatening, and waited. Minutes passed in a tense standoff. The Ravakai's breathing remained labored, but its eyes never left her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rumbling subsided. Mara took this as her cue and inched forward, opening her kit and removing the antiseptic spray. "This will sting," she warned, knowing full well that her words meant nothing to the creature, but finding comfort in the ritual of explanation. "But it will prevent infection." The first application of the spray to the nearest wound caused the Ravakai to jerk back with a snarl. But it didn't attack. Mara froze, then continued when the creature settled. With careful movements, she cleaned and treated each of the 3 major gashes, applying clotting agents and a flexible sealant that would protect the wounds while they healed. The damaged limb presented a greater challenge. Without proper equipment, she couldn't set what appeared to be a fracture or dislocation. Instead, she applied a temporary brace using materials from her pack, hoping it would provide some stability until natural healing began. Throughout the procedure, the Ravakai remained surprisingly docile, watching her with what she could only interpret as cautious curiosity. When she finally backed away, having done all she could, the creature made no move to follow or attack. It simply remained where it was, perhaps too weak to move, or perhaps, though Mara hesitated to anthropomorphize, understanding on some level that she had helped. Setting up a small monitoring station at a safe distance, Mara prepared for a long night. She erected a 1-person field shelter, positioning it where she could observe the Ravakai while maintaining a prudent escape route. As darkness fell, bringing with it a significant temperature drop, she activated her thermal blanket and continued her observations. The Ravakai hadn't moved from its position against the rocks. Its breathing seemed slightly less labored. But Mara worried about the blood loss and potential internal injuries she couldn't treat. She made detailed notes and recorded footage, telling herself that regardless of the outcome, this unprecedented close encounter would provide valuable data. She must have dozed off despite her best intentions, because she awoke with a start to find the landscape transformed by dawn's light and the Ravakai gone from its resting place. A moment of panic seized her until movement caught her eye. The massive predator had relocated during the night and now lay curled in a defensive posture not beside the rocks, but at the perimeter of her camp, almost as if it were standing guard. "Well," Mara whispered, a smile tugging at her lips despite the extraordinary danger of her situation. "That's certainly not in any of the behavioral texts." Over the next 3 days, a pattern emerged that defied everything Mara had learned about predator behavior. The Ravakai remained near her camp, gradually recovering strength. It would disappear for short periods, returning with small prey that it consumed at a distance. More remarkably, it began to respond to her presence not with aggression, but with what appeared to be recognition. On the 4th morning, Mara awoke to find a freshly killed native herbivore, something akin to a small deer, deposited at the edge of her camp. The Ravakai watched from several meters away, its posture suggesting expectation. "Are you bringing me breakfast?" Mara asked incredulously. "I'm flattered, but I've got protein bars." The creature made a chuffing sound that Mara had begun to associate with non-aggressive attention-seeking. Slowly, following an impulse she couldn't quite justify scientifically, she approached the kill, extracted a small tissue sample for later analysis, then backed away with a gesture of thanks. The Ravakai approached its kill, consumed a portion, then retreated again, seemingly satisfied with this strange ritual. That evening, Mara activated her communication device for the first time since leaving the base. She had expected search parties, reprimands, perhaps even termination of her contract. Instead, she found a series of increasingly worried messages from the base's science team, culminating in a notification that a retrieval unit would be dispatched if she didn't respond within 24 hours. "Helios base, this is Sinclair," she transmitted. "I'm alive and well. Currently conducting close observation of a Ravakai specimen approximately 7 kilometers southeast of the perimeter. Request extension of fieldwork authorization." The response was immediate and predictably negative. "Sinclair, this is CSO Harrington. Return to base immediately. You're in violation of at least 6 safety protocols. A security team is being dispatched to your location." "Negative," Mara replied firmly. "I'm in the middle of unprecedented behavioral observations. Sending data packet now. The Ravakai is displaying protective behavior toward a human observer, me, following medical intervention. This could revolutionize our understanding of xenobiology." A long pause followed, before Harrington's voice returned, noticeably less commanding. "Your data is intriguing, Dr. Sinclair. But the corporation has strict liability concerns. You have 48 hours to conclude your observations and return with your findings." Mara smiled to herself. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough time to document the basics of what was happening here. She looked over at the Ravakai, which had settled into what had become its customary sleeping position, close enough to her tent to respond to threats, but far enough to give her space. "Did you hear that?" she said to the creature. "We've got a deadline." The following morning, Mara decided to push the boundaries of their unusual relationship. Rather than conducting stationary observations, she would attempt to move through the terrain with the Ravakai, gathering environmental samples while documenting its behavior in a more dynamic context. She packed her essential equipment and dismantled her camp, leaving only the small tent as a base of operations. The Ravakai watched this process with evident interest, moving closer than usual to inspect her actions. "I'm going exploring," Mara explained, pointing toward a promising valley visible in the distance. "Care to join me?" To her amazement, when she began walking, the creature followed, maintaining a consistent distance of about 15 feet. As they traveled, Mara observed how it moved, the efficient gait, the constant environmental scanning, the subtle adjustments it made to accommodate her much slower pace. They reached a clearing where vibrant, fern-like vegetation grew in spiral patterns around a small pool of water. Mara knelt to collect samples, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her awareness of the predator. When she looked up, the Ravakai was gone. A flash of disappointment surprised her. Had the creature simply been heading in this direction independently? Was their connection merely a product of her human tendency to see patterns where none existed? Then she heard it, the distinctive warning call of a Ravakai, coming from just beyond a ridge to her right. Moving cautiously, Mara peered over the natural barrier to see her Ravakai. When had she started thinking of it as hers, facing off against another of its kind? The newcomer was larger, with more prominent armor plates and scarring that suggested greater age and experience. The two creatures circled each other, exchanging vocalizations that ranged from low rumbles to piercing shrieks. Mara activated her recording equipment, hardly daring to breathe as she witnessed what appeared to be a territorial dispute. The confrontation escalated to physical displays, raised appendages, threat postures, but stopped short of actual combat. After several tense minutes, the larger Ravakai backed away, maintaining eye contact until it disappeared into the dense vegetation. Her Ravakai remained alert for several minutes before returning to Mara's position, displaying what she could only interpret as agitation in its movements. "You were warning it away from me," Mara realized aloud. "You were protecting your territory, and I'm, apparently, part of that territory now." The implications were staggering. If the Ravakai had incorporated her into its concept of what needed protection, it suggested a level of cognitive flexibility far beyond what had been documented in the species. It raised profound questions about intelligence, adaptation, and the potential for cross-species bonding, even without shared language or evolutionary history. Over the next day and a half, Mara continued her observations, developing a rudimentary system of sound signals using her vocalization device, simple tones to indicate direction, danger, food, or rest. To her delight, the Ravakai began to respond consistently to these cues, even offering its own vocalizations that Mara cataloged meticulously. One particular sound, a three-tone warble followed by a clicking noise, seemed to be directed specifically at her. After hearing it repeatedly in contexts where the creature was seeking her attention, Mara began to wonder if it was a name of sorts. The thought both thrilled and humbled her. As her deadline approached, Mara faced the inevitable moment she had been avoiding in her thoughts. She would have to return to the base, and the Ravakai could not come with her. Attempting to bring an apex predator to a mining installation would be disastrous for all involved. On her final morning in the field, she packed her equipment with a heavy heart. The Ravakai watched from nearby, occasionally making the three-tone warble that she now automatically responded to. "I have to go," she told it, gesturing toward the direction of the base. "You've given me more data than I could have dreamed of, but our time's up," as if understanding her meaning, if not her words. The Ravakai moved closer than it ever had before, lowering its massive head to her eye level. Mara held perfectly still, heart pounding, as one of its upper limbs, the previously injured one she had splinted, now healing nicely, extended toward her. The deadly claw stopped just short of touching her face, hovering there in what seemed like a gesture of farewell, recognition. Mara would never know for certain. But in that moment, she felt a connection that transcended the barriers of species and evolution. Then the creature backed away, turned, and loped off into the wilderness of Ruby 9. Mara watched until it disappeared from view, then gathered her equipment and began the long walk back to Helios Base, her mind already composing the report that would surely be met with skepticism, if not outright disbelief. The security team met her halfway, led by a visibly relieved Chief Vasquez. "Dr. Sinclair," he said, professional enough to keep his tone neutral despite the clear disapproval in his eyes. "The CSO is waiting for your debriefing." Back at the base, Mara found herself in a sterile conference room facing not just Chief Science Officer Harrington, but also a holographic projection of Regional Director Liu, whose expression suggested Mara's career prospects had diminished considerably. "Dr. Sinclair," Liu began without preamble, "your unauthorized excursion has placed this operation at significant risk. Not only did you endanger yourself, but you potentially compromised our security protocols by demonstrating that our barriers can be circumvented." "With respect, Director," Mara replied, connecting her datapad to the room's display system. "What I've discovered is worth far more than any procedural concerns. For the next hour, she presented her findings, detailed observations, physiological data, behavioral patterns, and most importantly, evidence of cognitive capabilities and adaptive social responses previously undocumented in Ravakai. The specimen recognized that I had helped it, she explained, displaying footage of their strange food-sharing ritual. And it subsequently incorporated me into its territorial protection parameters. This suggests not just intelligence, but a capacity for what we might cautiously term gratitude or reciprocity. CSO Harrington leaned forward. Scientific curiosity clearly piqued despite his earlier admonishments. You're suggesting convergent evolution of social recognition systems across entirely separate evolutionary lineages. I'm suggesting we've barely scratched the surface of understanding intelligence beyond our terrestrial frameworks, Mara replied. The Ravakai demonstrated problem-solving, communication adaptation, and social flexibility that deserves further study. Director Lu's hologram flickered as she shifted position. Fascinating as this may be, Dr. Sinclair, it doesn't change the fact that you violated protocol and potentially endangered this installation. On the contrary, Mara countered. My work provides an opportunity to develop more effective coexistence strategies. If we can establish predictable communication patterns with apex predators, we reduce the likelihood of dangerous encounters and the need for lethal force. A lengthy debate ensued, with Harrington increasingly supportive of Mara's position, while Liu remained focused on corporate liability and operational efficiency. Eventually, a compromise emerged. Mara would be permitted to continue her research under strict conditions, including security escorts and scheduled excursions rather than extended field stays. One final question, Dr. Sinclair, Liu said as the meeting concluded. Do you believe this particular specimen is likely to return to human-occupied areas? Should we consider it a heightened threat due to its familiarity with our presence? Mara considered carefully before answering. Based on my observations, I believe this individual now associates humans, or at least me specifically, with positive outcomes rather than threat or prey. If anything, it represents a decreased risk factor. But truthfully, I don't expect to see it again. Its territory is well beyond our normal operational range. That night, exhausted from the debriefing and the emotional toll of the past week, Mara collapsed into her bed in the sterile quarters of Heliospace. The environmental controls, artificial lighting, and constant low hum of machinery felt stifling after days under Ruby 9's open sky. She fell into a dreamless sleep, her body finally processing the stress and exertion of her fieldwork. A persistent alarm jolted her awake what seemed like moments later. Red emergency lights pulsed throughout the room, and the base's AI system announced in its eerily calm voice, "Perimeter breach detected in sectors 7 through 9. All personnel report to designated security zones." This is not a drill. Mara was halfway into her gear before full consciousness returned. A breach of multiple sectors simultaneously suggested a coordinated attack. Unlikely for the wildlife she had studied unless. Her blood ran cold. Unless the barrier had failed catastrophically. Grabbing her datapad and emergency kit, she rushed into the corridor, which was filled with confused and frightened technical staff being herded toward the central hub by security personnel. "What's happening?" she asked, catching the arm of a passing engineer. "Power fluctuation caused a cascade failure in the barrier grid," he explained hurriedly. "Multiple incursions reported, mostly Skrell, but there are unconfirmed reports of larger predators as well." Mara's mind raced. The barrier failure would have been interpreted by the local wildlife as an opportunity. Previously, inaccessible territory suddenly available, complete with unusual scents and potential prey. The Skrell, always opportunistic, would have been the first to test the boundaries. Instead of following the evacuation route, Mara turned and headed toward the eastern perimeter. Her research lab was there, containing equipment she might use to help repel the wildlife without unnecessary bloodshed. "Dr. Sinclair," a voice called from behind her. "You need to proceed to the secure area." She turned to see Leon, one of the junior security technicians she had briefly spoken with during her orientation. "I can help," she insisted. "I have specialized equipment and knowledge of the local fauna." Leon hesitated, then nodded sharply. "The east section is in chaos. Security teams are deploying, but they're trained for human threats, not whatever is out there." Together, they sprinted through increasingly deserted corridors, the sounds of confusion and conflict growing louder. Through the reinforced windows, Mara caught glimpses of the compound's exterior, moving shapes in the darkness, the flash of weapons fire, the distinctive yipping calls of Skrell on the hunt. They reached her lab just as a tremendous crash reverberated through the building. The lights flickered, then stabilized. "That didn't sound good," Leon muttered. Mara quickly gathered her sound projector, tranquilizer kit, and portable scanner. The Skrell hunt in packs but are easily disoriented by specific frequencies. If we can deploy audio deterrents at key points, we can herd them back toward the perimeter without harming them. "With all due respect, Doctor, they're trying to eat people. Non-lethal might not be an option." "Trust me," Mara said, checking the calibration on her equipment. "Unnecessary killing will only escalate the situation. These animals aren't malicious, they're opportunistic. Remove the opportunity, and they'll retreat." A security alert flashed across both their datapads. "Eastern Quadrant evacuation required. Structural integrity compromised. All personnel relocate to Central Hub immediately." "That's our cue to leave," Leon said, already moving toward the door. Mara followed. But as they entered the main corridor, a secondary explosion somewhere in the complex sent a shudder through the building. Ceiling panels crashed down ahead of them, blocking their planned route. "Alternative exit through the loading bay," Leon decided, changing direction. "It's exposed to the exterior, but it's our only option now." They raced through the increasingly damaged facility, passing evidence of the incursion, claw marks on walls, equipment scattered by panicked personnel, and in one heart-stopping moment, a dark smear on the floor that Mara refused to examine too closely. The loading bay doors had been forced open, creating a gaping wound in the base's perimeter. Beyond, Mara could see the chaos unfolding across the compound. Security teams forming defensive positions, wildlife moving in erratic patterns through unfamiliar territory, and the distinctive silhouettes of Skrell darting between buildings. "We'll have to make a run for the Central Hub," Leon said, checking his weapon. "Stay close." As they prepared to dash across the exposed ground, a familiar sound stopped Mara in her tracks, the powerful, resonant roar of a Ravakai, coming from just outside the loading bay. "That's not good," Leon whispered, raising his weapon. "Wait," Mara said, placing a hand on his arm. "Let me check first." Cautiously, she approached the massive opening, scanning the darkness beyond. At first, she saw nothing but swirling dust and distant movement. Then a shape detached itself from the shadows. Massive, armored, unmistakable. "It's him," Mara breathed, recognizing the pattern of healing wounds and the distinctive gait. The Ravakai stood at the threshold of the human structure, its multiple eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. When it saw Mara, it made the three-tone warble she had come to recognize, followed by the clicking sound. "What is it doing?" Leon asked, weapon still raised but uncertainty clear in his voice. I think it followed me home," Mara said, a disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. Before either human could react further, a pack of Skrell rounded the corner of the building, clearly drawn by the scent of potential prey. They skidded to a halt at the sight of the Ravakai, but hunger or territorial aggression drove them forward after only a moment's hesitation. What happened next would feature prominently in Mara's subsequent reports. Security footage that would be reviewed by countless xenobiologists, and the revised operational procedures for all extraterrestrial mining installations. The Ravakai positioned itself between the Skrell pack and the humans, its massive form blocking the entrance to the loading bay. With a roar that seemed to shake the very air, it charged the pack, scattering the smaller predators in a display of raw power and aggression. Two of the braver Skrell circled back, attempting to flank the larger predator. With astonishing speed for its size, the Ravakai pivoted, catching one with a sweeping blow from its primary limbs that sent the creature tumbling across the compound. The second Skrell managed to rake its claws across the Ravakai's flank before being seized in those powerful jaws and flung aside. The brief but violent conflict ended as quickly as it had begun, with the Skrell retreating into the darkness, yipping in what Mara interpreted as frustrated rage. The Ravakai turned back toward the loading bay, blood seeping from fresh wounds inflicted by the Skrell. It made no move to enter the human structure, but stood guard at the threshold, its breathing heavy but posture alert. "It's protecting us," Mara said softly, awe evident in her voice. Just like it did in the field when that other Ravakai approached. Leon lowered his weapon slightly, confusion warring with professional caution. "That's not supposed to be possible. And yet, here we are," Mara replied, taking a careful step toward the creature. It watched her approach, but made no threatening moves. Their unlikely standoff was interrupted by the arrival of a security team led by Chief Vasquez, who assessed the situation with professional speed. "Step away from that thing, Dr. Sinclair," he ordered, his team raising weapons in unison. "No!" Mara moved to place herself between the Ravakai and the security team. "It's defending us. It drove off the Skrell pack that was about to attack." "Doctor, you're not thinking clearly, and that's an apex predator, not a pet." "I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have," Mara insisted. "This individual Ravakai has formed a protective bond following our interaction in the field. It's an unprecedented example of cross-species recognition and reciprocity." As if to emphasize her point, the Ravakai made the distinctive three-tone warble, still focused on Mara rather than the new human threats. Vasquez hesitated, clearly weighing the bizarre scene against his training and experience. "Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not convinced it is, we can't have a wild predator roaming the compound." "It's not roaming. It's standing guard," Mara corrected. "And right now, with the barrier down and Skrell packs hunting through your facility, I'd say having a Ravakai on our side is an asset, not a liability." A tense negotiation followed, conducted against the backdrop of continuing chaos throughout the compound. Eventually, pragmatism won out over protocol, with the defense systems compromised and personnel scattered. Additional protection was valuable regardless of its unusual source. Under Mara's guidance, the security teams adapted their response strategy. Rather than attempting to kill or drive off all wildlife indiscriminately, they focused on establishing safe corridors for personnel evacuation, using Mara's sound projectors to herd the Skrell away from occupied areas. Throughout the crisis, the Ravakai remained near Mara, occasionally disappearing to engage Skrell that ventured too close to human groups, then returning to its self-appointed post. The sight of humans and an apex predator working in concert, however loosely, was something no one present would ever forget. By dawn, the situation had stabilized. Emergency repairs to the barrier system had restored partial functionality, enough to prevent further incursions. The remaining Skrell were being systematically driven back into the wilderness, using non-lethal methods developed on the fly by Mara and the technical team. In the harsh light of Ruby 9's red sun, Mara found herself standing with CSO Harrington, Director Liu, now physically present rather than a hologram, and Chief Vasquez at the edge of the compound, watching as her Ravakai patrolled the perimeter at a respectful distance. The security footage is compelling, Lou admitted, her earlier hostility tempered by the night's events. What you've documented goes beyond novel behavior into something that challenges our fundamental understanding of cognition and socialization. I tried to tell you, Mara said, too tired for diplomacy. There's an intelligence there that we've been completely overlooking. Not human intelligence, but something equally valid in its own evolutionary context. The corporation is prepared to expand the research mandate of Helios Base, Liu continued, ignoring Mara's tone. With appropriate safeguards, of course. We're still a mining operation, not a xenobiology research station. But you recognize the potential value, Harrington interjected, both scientifically and practically. If we can establish reliable communication patterns with indigenous species, especially apex predators like the Ravakai, it reduces security concerns while opening new research frontiers. Mara was only half listening, her attention focused on the massive creature that had defied all behavioral predictions to forge an unlikely alliance. He needs a name, she said suddenly. I beg your pardon, Lou asked. The Ravakai. If we're going to be studying him specifically, monitoring his behavior over time, he needs a designation more specific than the Ravakai specimen. Harrington smiled slightly. I assume you have something in mind? Mara considered the creature's distinctive call, the three-tone warble, followed by clicks that it seemed to use specifically for her. Warble, she decided. His name is Warble. In the weeks that followed, Helios Base underwent significant changes. A dedicated research annex was established, with Mara appointed as lead xenobiologist. Security protocols were revised to incorporate non-lethal wildlife management techniques, and a specialized team was trained to work alongside Mara in her ongoing study of Ravakai behavior. Warble, as he was now officially designated in all reports, established a territory that overlapped with the base's perimeter. He never entered the human structures, seeming to recognize some invisible boundary, but he maintained a consistent presence in the surrounding area. Most remarkably, he began to display behavior that could only be described as cooperative. When Skrell packs approached too close to the base, Warble would drive them off without prompting. When research teams ventured beyond the barrier for sanctioned expeditions, he would often shadow them from a distance, appearing if threats emerged but otherwise maintaining his independence. Mara established a small observation post just outside the main barrier, a place where she could work in the field while maintaining communication with the base. A simple shelter with reinforced walls and basic research equipment. It became the focal point of her continuing study of Warble and, by extension, all Ravakai behavior. And each night, as Ruby 9's harsh sun set beyond the rusted horizon, Warble would take up his position outside her shelter, close enough to respond to threats, far enough to give her space. To the amazement of other personnel, he slept there, a living guardian that defied all previous understanding of predator psychology. It's like having the world's most intimidating guard dog, Leon commented one evening, having joined the research team after displaying a genuine interest in xenobiology during the breach crisis. Mara smiled, watching as Warble settled into his customary sleeping posture. Massive limbs tucked beneath his armored body, multifaceted eyes half closed, but still alert to movement. He's not a dog, she corrected gently. He's something we don't have a proper category for yet. Not domesticated, not tamed, but allied. A sovereign intelligence that has chosen cooperation over conflict. Whatever he is, Leon said, he's changed everything about how we operate here. Did you see the new corporate directive? All extraterrestrial installations are being required to include xenobiological assessment in their planning now, with emphasis on communication strategies rather than just defense. Mara nodded, satisfaction warming her, despite the dropping temperature. It's a start. We've spent so long assuming our only options were isolation or domination. Warble is proof that there's another path, one that requires us to recognize intelligence beyond our limited human parameters. As if hearing his name, the Ravakai shifted slightly, opening his eyes to fix them briefly on Mara, before resuming his rest. In her reports to Earth, Mara was careful to maintain scientific objectivity, documenting behaviors without excessive interpretation and acknowledging the limitations of her observations. But in her personal journal, she allowed herself to explore the deeper implications of what was unfolding on this distant world. "There is a moment," she wrote one night, "when you look into eyes that evolved on a different planet, under different stars, along a completely separate evolutionary path, and you recognize something. Not humanity, not even Earth-based cognition, but something more fundamental. A shared experience of being alive, of navigating a complex world with limited information, of making choices that ensure survival. Warble reminds me daily that intelligence isn't a human monopoly, nor is it a single spectrum with humanity at the pinnacle. It's a vast ecosystem of adaptations, each suited to specific contexts and challenges. By human standards, he'll never compose symphonies or build spacecraft. By Ravakai standards, humans are slow, fragile, and sensory-deprived. Yet here we are, finding common ground. He recognizes me as a distinct entity worthy of protection. I recognize him as a being with agency and intelligence deserving of respect. Without shared language, without shared evolutionary history, without any of the factors we've assumed were prerequisites for meaningful connection, we've established trust. If such a bridge can be built between species as different as humans and Ravakai, what might be possible elsewhere? What other intelligence have we failed to recognize simply because it doesn't mirror our own? Outside her shelter, Warble shifted in his sleep, a low rumble that might have been a snore emanating from his massive form. Mara smiled and continued writing. "Tomorrow we begin a new phase of research, using modified versions of the sound patterns Warble and I developed in our early interactions. We'll attempt to establish basic communication protocols with other Ravakai individuals. The hypothesis is that if one member of the species could adapt to human presence, others might as well, given appropriate introduction methods. Security, understandably, is nervous. Corporate is cautiously optimistic about potential applications across their operations. The science team is divided between excitement and skepticism. As for me, I find myself in the unfamiliar position of both researcher and subject. Whatever bond exists between Warble and myself is as much a topic of study as his hunting patterns or territorial behavior. I must maintain scientific objectivity while acknowledging that I am, inevitably, part of the system I'm observing. There's a word in the old scientific literature, from before space exploration, before we encountered truly alien life, Umwelt, the perceptual world in which an organism exists. The recognition that each species inhabits not just a physical environment, but a sensory and cognitive one unique to its evolutionary path. What I've glimpsed through my work with Warble is the possibility of bridges between these worlds, not perfect understanding. We'll never truly know what it is to perceive reality through a Ravakai's senses, but connection, nonetheless. A recognition that despite our differences, we share this universe, this moment in time. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's everything. She finished her entry and stepped outside, where the night air of Ruby 9 carried the metallic scent of native vegetation and the distant calls of creatures adapting to life on this harsh but beautiful world. Warble raised his head at her appearance, those alien eyes reflecting the starlight. "Good night, friend," Mara said softly. The Ravakai made his distinctive three-tone warble, followed by the clicking sound that had become as familiar to her as her own name. Then, he settled back into his protective position, a predator who had made the remarkable choice to become a guardian. In the vast, indifferent expanse of the universe, where intelligent life had evolved along countless separate paths, they had found common ground, not through conquest or dominance, but through a simple act of compassion that had transcended the boundaries of species and worlds. And as Mara returned to her shelter, secure in the knowledge of Warble's vigilant presence, she wondered how many other connections waited to be discovered among the stars. How many other predators might become protectors, if only given the chance.